Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for braving the rain and being here. I have a feeling that there are two kinds of people in the room: those who have been traumatized by the school system, and and those who want to make the school system a little less traumatic. And I think it could be the same, space. So I am in no way qualified either by age or designation to be here with our esteemed panelists, but my own experiences in life have given me a certain, I think all of us, because we've been through the system, right? And if you get anybody here, I think they'll be able to have a good conversation about how they messed it up. So yeah, that does qualify me. So I'd just like to give you a little bit of context about why the Red Door came up with the idea of this panel. We're very fortunate to be able to work very extensively with young people. And what we found is that we're at a place now where our country's learning outcomes are some of the poorest in the world, in spite of this prioritization of academic performance over other markers of development. At the same time, young people are experiencing more mental health issues and breakdowns than ever before. So the question that we're left with is India, which has the youngest demographic in the world, that is something, right? This is the country that has the youngest demographic in the world. Are we heading into an extremely volatile future, completely unprepared? And is it time that we started rethinking and reimagining our education system? Is it time we started reimagining education itself? That is what our esteemed panelists are going to be talking about. So, Dr. Sen, the first question to you. You have quite some experience, probably over 2 decades of experience working with young people. And you must have had quite some time to think about the relationship between how our educational system is and how it functions, and the issues and the challenges that young people, children, adolescents come to you with. What are your insights?
Oh, that's a very broad question, because my experience is not after I, took this role in the mental health space, but also as a child, because
Right, of
yeah,
course.
I do believe, and I qualify to for a diagnosis of ADHD, and I had my challenges there as well. So my takeaway is both as a lived experience in school and a so-called very good balanced school with a lot of extracurricular activities, and yet I found myself to be a misfit. So my school experience was marked by various challenges at different times. Yeah. And of course we've also seen how over the last, we've worked in different settings with schools and educational systems. In India, in Delhi and NCR, we've been working since nearly 20 years now, right? So we've seen the evolution of certain schools as well, and how conversations about mental health has gradually entered the space, which is very good, very interesting. How much change that has brought about is, of course, another question altogether. So, and to get a hang of that, to get an understanding of that, I think it's important to think back and try and imagine what schools or education systems were when they first began. So they started during the Industrial Revolution, and schools were built because both the parents would go to work and the children had to be sent somewhere, and the second was to build a workforce.
Yeah.
So the objectives were very clear, right? And over the years, there's been many questions, particularly in towards the end of the last century, from 1980s onwards. There were lots of questions about what are we doing to our children, by putting them through this process and the so-called schooling education system. And the whole idea of holistic education came. That was in the 1980s, and there the question was that, are we only sending children to school to learn academics and develop a few skills to be able to work later, or is there much more? And of course there is much more, because the kids spend 6 to 8 hours daily for the majority of their living year, yeah, in schools. So I mean, the impact of that is obviously much more profound than just the lessons that happen in a classroom. And I think people began to understand that, right? And then if you sort of zoom in to the last 2 decades, then you find that many things have been changing very rapidly. So they say that the world has changed much more in the last 20 years than it had done in the previous 200 years. So that is the rate of change. And we don't have any idea as to what this generation who are in school right now will have to face up to. Just think, I mean, if you look at 20 years ago or 30 years ago, did we ever imagine our connection with the digital world? We couldn't have done, right? And so it's changed dramatically, yeah. And again, over the next 20 to 30 years, which is when these kids will actually be out there, working, bringing up families, saving the environment, decrease polarization, address child abuse and abuse of women. They have to do many things, because those are all things that that are important, don't you think, in the community that we live in? Yeah, they have to manage their own anger and frustration, which was absolutely palpable because of the experiences they've had. More so after the COVID crisis, isn't it? Yeah. So then automatically the question of whether mental health should be a part of education becomes central. Yeah, because there are 2-3 reasons to this. One is that if your mental health is not good, are you able to learn well? So is school able to do things in the way they want to do things, even if it is to do with academics and getting good grades? If your child is going through depression, anxiety, attention difficulties, using substances, is that going to happen? Is it going to come together for them during these years, which are all absolutely common things that we see? We know the rates of anxiety, depression, substance misuse, eating disorders that skyrocketed. Yeah, I mean, of course, during the COVID times, it's kind of grown exponentially. But even before that, in 2015, the WHO had done multicentric studies where they said that at least 20% of children and adolescents will have a diagnosable psychiatric disorder. And by 2020, that would increase by another 50%, which means 30%, right? But now, after the COVID, the speculation is that it's probably 40% or 50% of kids who have some mental health challenges right now. So in that kind of a scenario, if you don't address it, how will they learn? Yeah, or what will they take from the schooling and education experience, or college for that matter, as they go along? That's one part of it, right? And the second part is that in this kind of a scenario where you cannot have a specialist for every child who's disturbed, can we use other resources in the community to be able to contribute to mental health? Right now, education or schooling systems contribute in the other way. They create the stress because of the exam stressors and the competition, etc. So a lot of the a lot of what is happening to our children is because of the way schooling system is, isn't it? It's creating the stress, it's creating the anxiety, depression. Of course, there are many other factors as well, and perhaps there's no scope of going into those, but definitely most schools, traditional schools, will contribute to it, where you do not get into a college of your choice with 100% marks. And that was a reality. Last year, kids who had 100% in their board still did not get in, because in some colleges like LSR and SRCC, the cutoff was above 100 because people had got. I don't know whether you know about this, but it came out in the papers. This is ridiculous, absolutely. So they keep upping the ante, and who has to face the brunt of it? The children have to, isn't it? Schools, colleges, yeah, that's where it happens. So again, in this kind of a scenario, what can we do to help schools understand that even for their own objective, mental health becomes central, and they can, if they want to contribute to the society and community, have a very, important role, because they're sitting right out there. It's a part of any child's life. Schools and colleges are, in a way which can influence them in various profound ways, isn't it? I think I'll stop here. I'm just kind of laying the I'll stop here, and I'm sure there are many other questions and perspectives that.
But thank you, Dr. Sen. There were two things that I especially picked up on. Because with my work in resilience, that's what we look at. This is a VUCA world. It's a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. This is a military term that's gone into management, but now it's very widely, I don't know, I mean, India probably, they're always
VUCA.
delayed in, it's called VUCA, yes. So it's almost like, you either prepare for what's coming next, especially like Dr. Sen said, because everything is happening at an exponential rate. And with climate change and AI and people losing their jobs because of AI coming in and climate change induced migration, and how do you live, I mean, with all the problems we already have, when these are going to be added, and you can see during pandemic, everything was thrown out of whack. Nobody was prepared. People are not prepared to deal with uncertainty. They don't have the coping mechanisms either. And that is something that we have always wondered, especially at the Red Door, like I said, because we work with a lot of young people. Why don't schools, because it's such a wonderful platform, isn't it? Like you said, 8 hours, 6 to 8 to 10 hours even sometimes, with tuitions after schools. Every child, I just found out a 5-year-old in my neighborhood goes to tuitions, after school. So all this time that you have, what are you teaching them? You are asking them to memorize things that are available with a Google search. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's just, and so, the question is, why, I mean, and I would really like Dr. Chatterjee, who is a cognitive neuroscientist, to elaborate on this. What really is the connection between learning and emotional well-being? Because as Dr. Sen said, that mental health is at the center of this discourse, even for an education system like the one in our country that is completely, it has a vehement stance, prioritizes only academic performance mainly, even for them, if they were to engage with this, then they would have to engage with mental health, because otherwise it's just not possible for young people to perform well. Again, an obvious thing that we seem to understand in the room, but it doesn't leave the room. So, so Dr. Chatterjee, could you just give us a sense of how intimately learning and emotional well-being are connected? Dr. Chatterjee, you're on mute. You're on mute.
No, I don't think so. You can hear her,
the
but
volume?
the volume's very
the-
low.
Shilpa ma'am,
Can we put a mic in front of the speaker?
right? You want the mic? Okay, right. Yeah. This was unplanned.
Move on to the next speaker. She'll
Hmm.
come back.
hmm.
Okay,
Is that going
okay.
to be useful?
So we'll have to come back to Dr. Chatterjee after the next question. Yeah, I think that should work as well. Can we just put the speaker, the mic next to the laptop? Will that work?
Trying to do that, but that's not working. So she's saying we can move on to the next question, and then
Right.
she'll join us.
Sure,
Right?
sure,
So
sure,
we're
sure.
figuring that out.
Absolutely. So yes, so Dr. Nandini actually, she thought the session was tomorrow, and she's really sad that she couldn't be here today. So she's trying to join us, of course, virtually. So yes, Shilpa ma'am, uh, what do you think, with your experience as the founder of an alternative school? What you must have, because you also incorporate a lot of, I won't say what you do because I want you to talk about it, but what is your sense of why or how learning and emotional well-being are connected, and what are the changes you have seen when that has been incorporated? What are the real world changes or the difference it has made in academic performance as well? Because a lot of children come with this label of, oh, he's not a good learner or she's not a good learner. But what happens when you start engaging with the child holistically?
I hope I'm audible. So, we know that emotional well-being, the emotional settlement in a person, not just a child, in any person, is the fountainhead of learning. If we are not feeling emotionally settled, safe, secure inside, we cannot possibly learn. And that remains true for all of us adults today also. It's not that we are not in school or university anymore, so we don't need to learn anything today. In all our domains, we experience this. If we are going through a period of stress, a period of anxiety, we are in no space to learn any new skill, anything new that we need in our lives. And the same is even more true of children, because at their age, their learning rate is extremely high. And a child is new to this world. A child is, with every passing day, understanding, figuring out so much about how the world around them works. So for children, the adults who work with children, for them to know this and for them to completely believe in this and for them to prepare the world in which a child has to step in with this belief, where this belief holds true, and this belief is a part of the fabric of the school on an everyday basis, is critical. Otherwise, like we said, we as adults would have our goals, we as adults would have our plans and our programs and our curriculum and everything ready to be rolled out. But what is it that it will reach? What is it that will reach the child? In education also, in a school also, school is always constantly evaluating both things, right? The school is evaluating objectives on one side. The school is also evaluating outcomes on the other side. This, as an adult, this was my objective, but what is it that has reached the child? So these two things cannot work, they cannot come together if that bridge, which is of the child being in an emotionally safe and settled and secure space, cannot come together. Now, in the context of a school, how does that work? So just as a family starts with adults, right? It's the parents or a couple that come together and they create a family, and then the children join in. It's the same in a school. A school is a space that is created by adults for children to step into it. So if in a school we are working with adults, the adults who are a part of that school system are themselves not emotionally educated, if they are themselves not in a space where they are in charge, they feel in charge of their own mental well-being, then how is this ever going to work for the children? So I think first and foremost, for a school, for a family, for parents, to be aware of what does emotional education mean for ourselves is very, very important. And at Prakriti, so I'll share maybe our journey, in education has been a little different, because we never started a school with the aspiration of being a big school or being a 2,000 children school or having, the best, being the school that is getting the best grades. And so that was never a part of the aspiration anyway. We wanted to be a space for young children where meaningful work could be done and needs that are the most natural needs of childhood could be met. So the school has grown organically, and I think that's one of the things which is, a reflection of how childhood is. Childhood is also a very slow learning process, and I think this epidemic of mental health that we are seeing today is because the pace of childhood has really, it has hastened. It has become something that children are just not built to cope with that. So in a school space, first and foremost, for adults to go through this journey of understanding what their own emotional fabric is about, what does mental health mean for them, are they in charge of their own mental well-being, I think that's very important. So the school, that is a very important part of the mandate of the school. So we have, whether that's through meditation that is woven into the fabric of everyday school, or that's through a year-long workshop that teachers are currently, all of us in school are currently participating in, which is on the science of mindfulness, art of happiness, where we are learning, we are decoding, we are understanding what is the true nature of happiness. what we think is happiness, what I think will give me happiness, and what actually gives me happiness, and drawing upon both the Eastern and the Western side of the world, the Eastern traditions, the Eastern philosophy, and Western science and research. So this part is coming together in school. Also, the school works very closely with parents in building awareness on what are the true needs of a child, what is childhood all about, and what is it that a home and school environment need to be all about for that childhood to come together and to flourish, and for that emotional and mental settlement and stability to be in place. We've seen it across years, we've seen it across ages. Today, Prakriti has reached a stage where we have a middle school, and we've seen that when emotional well-being and health is compromised, no learning can happen. In this year itself, of course, COVID has complicated things for everybody. It has made life challenging for everyone. But in this year itself, we have a few live examples, and I'm talking about adolescents and pre-adolescents, where the various challenges that came together for them over the past 2 or 3 years, when they stepped back into a social domain. And school is a social domain. We always tend to think of school as an academic space. No, this is where we go to learn subjects and clear exams. But school, before being an academic space, is a challenging social space, because you're with your peer group. And children who are older than you can take care of you. Children who are younger than you can, somehow get them to do what you want them to do. But your peers will not do that. So a school is a very challenging social space for children. And when children with, who had emotional difficulties or going through an emotional challenging time step back into school, it just exploded. It just exploded for them. And over the past 6 months, 8 months, a year, as a school, as facilitators, we've had to consciously make that decision along with parents that moving ahead on the academic is not the priority. Creating a space where a child can have a learning program which is differentiated but which is suited to the needs of the child, where the child has a space where the child can express what the child is going through, creating a space where a child feels accepted without judgment. And that comes more easily from adults, because adults understand that it doesn't come that easily from peers. So building sensitization programs, which has always been a part of the school space, because Prakriti is an inclusive school. But in these 2 years, that also took a step back, because that space where children were together, they had learned to accept and include each other. 2 years later, when we all came back, we saw that even that had taken a step back. So we are having to rebuild that in school. So creating that space is what has helped, and 3 of these children are today at a space where the learning domains that they had moved away from, and they were only wanting to engage with school in the differentiated, some of them were islands, some of them were group interactions. They were only wanting to engage with that. From there, now the child wants to go back and become a part of the general school fabric. And the child is saying, okay, I was coming here to do my, something in STEM, but maybe can we reschedule this, because, I have an English class going on and I would like to be a part of that. We had a student who, for, whatever reasons, wherever she was before this, had just like Rituparna in the previous session was sharing, that she built this belief about herself that she just cannot learn numbers. But that became her story, but that was not what the truth was. So similarly, when the child got an opportunity to engage with a learning domain, with mathematics in a friendly way, with expectations dropped, and with a friendly space being created, she is very happy today to be a part of that group, and she feels more socially included and a part of her grade as well. And a learning domain that she was just absolutely, that was like a condition to joining Prakriti, that I will not be asked to join the maths class, and I will give science a chance, and if it works for me, I will sit, otherwise don't ask me to sit. And we said, fine, you join, you see how it goes. The one thing that played that became the pivot for change for these children were facilitators who created an emotional bond with them, who created that space where the child could go and talk to them, not just in the class, not just about the subjects, but they built a personal connect with them. Some of it was fostered by school, some of it the facilitators took as their own personal, it's a part of their own personal calling. So I hope I've answered some part of your question, but it's very, very clear, it's very apparent that what neuroscience tells us in terms of the structure of our brain, the working of our brain, the fact that the neocortex, you would know the terminology better than me. I hope I'm not mixing up terms here. But the part of our brain that is responsible for the cognitive learning, the rational, logical decision making, and the emotional part of the brain, the one that regulates our emotional behavior, there is a control tussle that goes on between them. And if on the emotional front, if things are not settled, then the cognitive learning cannot take place. That's a given. So I think for a school to give precedence to this, give adequate importance to this, and as part of the what is the mandate of the school, what is the vision mission statement of the school, and how does it translate into the everyday working of the school, I think giving due importance to this is very important. I just also want to share, this just came up since we were talking about online school. So 2.5 years ago, when suddenly at the stroke of midnight everything had to be converted into an online world, we also struggled. We struggled big time, and we especially struggled with the younger children. The older ones very quickly figured out, what a pleasurable world they had suddenly been thrown into, where they had screens, and it just took a few weeks for them to figure out that, oh, the teacher doesn't know what is running on my screen. They didn't know that if they were wearing glasses, or sometimes even in their eyeballs, the teachers could see what they were seeing on the screens. But it's really the younger children who had a really tough time, adapting to this online world. And then after 2 months of struggle, we realized what was missing. So what was missing in the online world was that emotional connect between the teachers and the children that was missing. So when we came back in July after holidays, we changed the entire structure, and we moved into a structure where every teacher was meeting every child at least once, if needed twice a week, one-on-one, online, to build that bond, to build that friendship, to build that emotional connect. And then in a month, 2 months, things settled down. Only when that came in, then 2.5 years of online school went ahead peacefully, went ahead with children wanting to be a part of it, and not with parents having to struggle to make them sit. Anyway, a Prakriti parent doesn't believe in that, so that anyways was not coming together. But it was only when the emotional connect came together that this could work.
Thank you, Shilpa ma'am. I actually feel a lot of gratitude that you're giving so many young people such a great schooling experience and not traumatizing them, So I would just like to, because I think Dr. Nandini can join us now. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so just I just like to, because you're a cognitive neuroscientist who works in designing curricula that integrates both psychosocial and emotional needs and learning needs, and where the imperative is not academic performance but holistic development, just like Shilpa ma'am was talking about. First of all, of course, I would like you to answer the question of what is, cognitively, from a cognitive neuroscientist's perspective, what is clearly the connection between learning and emotional well-being? And the second would be, what have you conducted impact studies of the curricula that you have designed, and what do the results show?
Apologies again for not being there in person. I'm trying to, I heard Amit mentioned the WHO study, and since he was spending a little bit of time trying to sort of get this to work, I pulled out that WHO study, and here is the study that I think he was referring to. And I think it's important to have this up there, because the immensity of the numbers should hopefully give us a couple of sleepless nights, if not a couple of months of them. So these are numbers from India, from the WHO study, okay? And 264 million kids at risk for anxiety alone, and the numbers below will show you the numbers for suicidal behavior, distraction, anxiety, loneliness, and no close friends. Okay. Um, these are the, the words we want to worry about because these are a reality, and I think if there's one thing that the COVID-19 crisis only brought to fore, something that both the speakers have mentioned, is school is first a social space and a learning space second. No student missed going to a math class, but we spoke to millions of students and they missed their friends, they missed their teachers. They missed the social connect, and they missed this because of the fact that the brain that we have is a social emotional brain. We are social emotional beings by neurobiological structure. This is not something that we are inventing, but this is the way our brains are wired. And learning is a cognitive emotional process. So there are a couple of structures up here, and I won't have time obviously to go through all of them. But these are parts of the brain that are involved in motivation, engagement, connection, emotion, thinking, learning, and decision making. All of which are involved in social emotional learning and in learning. So there are these actually interact. And what's been quite amazing is if you look into this more carefully, so if you look at the region which is in orange and yellow and a little bit in blue, all these are areas that are part of the social brain. Okay? A small part of the brain at the bottom where you see AMYG, that's the amygdala, and HIPP is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is that small. Okay? So a very small part of the brain is actually devoted to remembering, but then a very large part of the brain is devoted to social and emotional interaction. That's because these are important for us as human beings. That's why the cortex is distributed and organized in a way that you have so much devoted to social and emotional learning, yet we do not seem to prioritize it in our daily education and in our daily lives. So that's where I think the science of the last 25 years has really transformed our understanding of learning and consequently our purpose for education and what it should be targeted towards. And I'm going to try and touch upon these two very quickly. One, if you look at the energy that is taken up by the brain in doing any activity, if 80%, so the brain takes most of your energy. If most of that energy is just taken up by trying to feel secure and safe, where is energy left to learn? Okay. And that's something that we want to think about. So you want to make sure that the brain energy available is for learning and not for feeling safe. And that's why social emotional learning becomes important. Secondly, what we also learned, and this is because of an assessment that MGIEP did over the last 3 years on the purpose of education system. It's called the LC assessment, and it's the first international scientific and evidence-based assessment of education systems. And that was that the purpose of education systems has been to build human capital for economic growth. But if you review the science, what the science says is that the way the brain is structured, clearly the focus of education needs to be building human relationships. So the focus of the education system really has to change, because if you have to cater to the needs and design of your brain, you actually need to teach children how to build relationships. And relationships are based on social emotional learning. Academics is a small part of navigating some of those relationships as we engage in different kinds of skill building. But the purpose of education systems really needs to shift now, because that's what life and navigating life is all about. Okay? The metro station on the model that we encounter, the auto wala whom you work with, the employees you work with, it's all social emotional learning that's in place over there. There's a small amount of time where you are designing something where your cognitive skills and academic skills are really coming into play. But the rest of it is all your ability to recognize the emotions of your co-workers, of the people around you, of learning to interact with them, and in the process managing your own. So there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that social emotional learning has to be central if learning has to happen, period. I don't think there's a debate about it anymore. So the next thing becomes is, how do we try and teach it? And that's been the second part, which has been very, very useful to know, is it's malleable. It can be taught. Just like you can teach a child to learn to read, to juggle balls, to play the piano, you can teach them how to manage, understand their emotions, recognize them, and then go about regulating them. And that's what we need to bring into classrooms. We need to teach them techniques of mindfulness, of the fact that when your brain is feeling anxious, if you engage in a sensory activity, what you're really doing is taking some of that energy away from the anxious part of the brain to the sensory part of the brain. Once they come into the sensory part of the brain, you are much more in control and you're able to go about and participate in that learning. So some of these need to come into our classrooms, and just before I step away, I want to share with you an experience which happened with me last week. I went to a school in the UK, small school, a little bit in the countryside. And you know how they're teaching social emotional learning to 5-year-olds. Okay? They have the barking dog, which is the amygdala. They have the hippocampus, or the elephant that never forgets. And they have the wise owl, which is the prefrontal cortex. So a child can say in class that my dog is barking. I need to listen to my prefrontal cortex and either go out for a little walk, go eat a snack, or go and talk to an adult. It's something as simple as that which begins to start social emotional learning in a classroom, something a child can tie into. And believe me, children are going back and sharing this with their parents when their mom or dad is getting mad at them saying, your dog is barking, here is a snack, listen to the wise owl, and I think you will do better. So I'll pause there and maybe let you continue with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee, and that was a really lovely, anecdote that you described. So, the barking dog, then the elephant that remembers, and the wise owl, is it? That's
Absolutely.
lovely. We should remember that as well. Yes, yes. Thank you so much. So, I think we don't have much time. So, I just want to wrap up with one last question. And again, I want Dr. Sen, if you would want to elaborate on it. I've been very curious about this, and I think I have a bit of a sense of it myself, but I would like you to talk about it. If it's so apparent that there is a connection, that learning cannot take place without looking at your emotions, without looking at your emotional well-being, then why the disengagement? Why this reticence, with this hesitation of the academic system, the education system in the country, the policy makers, schools, Prakriti being an exception, of course. Why this hesitation to engage with it? I mean, the evidence is there, we have the information. So I just wanted to ask you, is this a cultural thing? And if we had to reimagine education, then would you have to do it from a cultural viewpoint?
Yes, Pranami, I do think that, I think it's historical, it's cultural. These are belief systems we as a society carry by default. The definitions of success. Who decides what children should learn, or who decides that what will equip our children to negotiate through the, as you said, what did you say? VUCA, volatile, uncertain?
Complex and ambiguous.
Complex and ambiguous world, which is probably going to get more and more VUCA as we go along, isn't it? Yeah. So who decides that, right? Do we even have the experience, life experience, or understanding to be able to decide that, right? So the question of agency is very important here, and I think that many times when, as adults, we take decisions like this, we fail to consider what young people think about it. And I think that's one of the things that we have to include where the process of education and setting goals, etc., is done collaboratively, right? That's one first thing. And for that, of course, adults have to come down from the high horse and say, you know what, we can learn from children. That's something that we find very hard as adults to accept, isn't it? Yeah. See, ideas and policies are great, right? And we have in our country great policies, a great constitution, fabulous laws, and the new national education policy, I think it's called. Actually, if you read through it, it sounds very comprehensive, and you sit up and say, wow, there's somebody who's thinking about it. But how does it translate into action? What brings about this change culturally? What makes it compelling for schools and stakeholders out there? Those are questions that we have to ask, and we have to stay with it. These are hard questions, and it will take time. They don't happen overnight. Just because it's a policy, schools don't begin to change. For instance, a simple thing like the state mandated that all schools should have counselors. Yeah. Now, what was the reaction of that? So most schools who wanted to save their back hired a counselor, and most of these counselors had just passed out of their masters, where there's hardly any training in counseling therapy or a practical sense of what you need to do, or even understanding children for that matter, right? And not only that, the school management said, okay, here's your room at the corner of a corridor, and if some children misbehaves or is not studying well, we'll send them to you, right? So the perception of this counselor in the school's or the children's eye is that, oh my God, you pull up your socks, if you get caught, we'll be sent to the counselor, which became a punishment. So where is the emotional safety there that you were talking about, Shilpa ma'am, yeah? So to be able to build emotionally safe spaces, accepting neurodiversity, and also having infrastructure there requires a lot of reflection, looking within your immediate community to see what do kids in this community at this stage in our lives, in this stage in history require. Yeah, and for that to come together needs many people, and that I believe it requires the school, no doubt. It requires the students who can constantly give feedback towards it, and the larger parent community. You have to take them on board, right? And only then can you begin to build systems over a period of time. So it's challenging, but at the end of it, very gratifying. So you challenge then a lot of these ideas about what constitutes success, and does a school become good if 30 people from that batch, which is a batch of about 2,000 in the first instance, the batch itself is about 1,000 or 2,000, 30 people get into IIT. Is that a mark of success? Or is it a mark of success that when these kids are coming out after the final year, a lot of them are concerned about the environment, about the violence in society, and they want to contribute. They want to do something about it, which is the larger, the larger goal or the larger objective. These are conversations we have to have. We have to have these conversations in various spaces, yeah. And most importantly, I think, with young people themselves. We have attempted to do that in colleges. We have taken the concept of, let's say depression or anxiety, and gone to colleges, had open houses in DU over a period of 3 years, opened up conversations, not just with students, but also with management, as to look at what kids are going through and what do we do together. And in many colleges, they actually, besides, of course, their music society and their debating society, they started a mental health society. And that's a starting point. Right. That's how you begin to actually bring the conversation within a community, which just wants to turn a blind eye. Because there is so much of stigma, there is so much of shame associated with mental health, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, it's not an easy path, but at the end of it, it is very exciting and gratifying. If we are able to make this journey, I think life will become richer, not for only our children, but maybe in many ways for us as adults as well.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. I was wondering if Dr. Chatterjee would have any thoughts on this as well.
She's not audible.
She's not.
Thank you for reading my mind. I did want to jump in for maybe just 30 seconds to just say two things that I feel about very strongly. One, I think as a society we have to take a stand. We just have to speak up. It cannot rest with a bunch of people who make education policies, make them, we have to start standing up to that change and that difference and say this is what we are going to prioritize and acknowledge and put at the forefront. That's one thing. Second thing, I think, and excuse my saying so, but I take as much responsibility. I think parents are not enough brought into this conversation. There have been a number of conversations happening with young people and teachers because they see it. But parents' measure of what they think is success is creating such a big challenge with children are struggling to manage that we have to start engaging with them more. They have to begin to realize that their children's jobs are not to fulfill their unfulfilled dreams, but to become beautiful, caring individuals of society who have dreams of their own. And that's really what we are trying to do as parents. So I think parents have to come in more strongly in the system. Secondly, society has to take much more of a role. And finally, I think some of it can start by saying when your child comes home from school every day, don't ask him or her how many marks they got, but ask them how many acts of kindness they did. Let that conversation begin to change with a parent, with a child, and maybe we begin to see, make it into a habit. And only then will it begin to change. There is just too much at stake if we don't address this right now. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. So I just have one last question to Shilpa ma'am. The way you described Prakriti and its ethos and its ideology, it's almost like a manifestation of exactly, the things that Dr. Sen and Dr. Chatterjee have been talking about. I just want to know, what drove you to create something that is at the same time very rare and cutting edge, because it doesn't happen often, but also that's so important and so necessary, because it must have been hard. It must have been hard because that is not how things are done here in India.
What drove me was my child. I had a 1.5-year-old who woke up and went into the garden one morning, and she picked up a stick, and then for the next 1 hour or so she was playing with a stick, and the stick was a stick, it was a bat, it was a knife. She was using it to, play the xylophone, which was the car grill. And her grandmother said to me, please do anything, don't put her in a school that says a stick is a stick, full stop. So that was my one-line motivation. Once you start looking for something, the universe will find a way to give it to you. So one thing led to another. That's a story for another time. But on the question of, is it hard? So I was thinking about it, when I was coming into IHC today on, like invariably the closing of a panel like this would be, so what do we do? Okay, we've spoken about a lot of beautiful things. We all agree. But what needs to be done? And I realized that, whenever we think about change, that change has to come from the system. The whole system has to change. It's a very big goal. And who drives the system anyway? Who controls the system? I don't control the system. I cannot say anything about the system, sitting here today. Even if I were a regulator, even if I was the head of that regulating agency, I'm still one person. I'm still one part of a very big system. So wanting for things to change from a system is a very big goal. At least it makes me feel overwhelmed, and it makes me feel not equipped to do anything. But if I can start with one goal at a time, and if I can just start working on that, and if one institution, one parent, one school leader, one teacher can take up one goal for themselves, it can absolutely work. After 11 years, Prakriti is a 250 children's school. By that yardstick alone, we are a failure. I was the best student in my school. I topped in school. I topped in university. I don't know how, but I did. And then the next morning when I landed up at my first workplace, I spent the next at least 2 years in that first workplace coming to terms with the fact that I was a complete social misfit. I had no clue how to work with people in an office. So now, where did my school and my education and my, medal, where did it land me? I don't know. So my goal in Prakriti is that this system of extrinsic evaluation, at one point a teacher gives you marks, then a board gives you marks, then a university gives you marks, and somewhere we, over the first 25 years of a child's life, we end up building a belief system that only what others tell you about you is true. That's who you are, and that's the only you that there is. If it can change at home, it can change in school. So in school, can school have a system where a child, so academics is a part of a school system, right? And once you reach middle school, it is the biggest part of the school system, whether we like it or not. So once a child reaches middle school, can there be a system that says, okay, you have these 5 subjects, okay, you're going to have these 5 exams, you're going to have at least 2 or 3 of them in a year. You decide what your goal is for each subject. I'm talking marks here, plain good old exams and marks. For each subject, what is your okay? What is your good? What is your excellent? When I was in school, my excellent for maths was very different from my okay or excellent in chemistry. I was dying to somehow get over with chemistry. So my okay or excellent for chemistry was not the same that it was for maths or English. So if every child can set their own goals, if every child can decide what do they need to do to be able to achieve this goal, and what is the help that they need from the world around them, what is the help they need from their parents. Maybe it's just as simple as, can you set an alarm for me? Can you just remind me when I'm studying not to have my phone on, not to go on Instagram? Whatever, what is that help that they need from the world around them? And that includes parents, that includes schools, that includes the peer group. And go with this, start with this 1 month, 2 months before the exam. Once the exams are done, go back to it and see where I landed. I am telling you, 99% of the cases, the child will land somewhere between the okay and the excellent. So that 3-step goal is a safety net for a child to land in. And even if I get 60% in Hindi and everyone else has got an 85, well, I was still between my okay and good. It is the safety net that can take the heat off examinations and results. And then, I don't even want to talk about that, because I think a festival on mental health should absolutely focus on how can every child feel okay with where they are. Start with that, and then see over time your own goals will evolve, your own standards will evolve. A lot of parents today, I'm a parent twice over myself. I have a child who's in senior school, will be sitting for a board exam next year. But over time, I know parents would feel that then children will keep the safest possible goals for themselves. Yes, maybe, depending upon the first time that they will set their goals, what has been the experience for them, their real life experience, they could start with that. It's fine. At least let's stay realistic, let's stay on the ground, so that by the time they come to that stage where they're really making life decisions, they have that confidence in themselves that I can set good goals for myself and I can meet up to those goals that I set for myself. And then if a board exam gives them, a certain certificate and tells them this is where you are, this is how good you are, and this is how good you are not, they still have that safety of the safety net that they have built for themselves over these years. So is it difficult? It is difficult if we depend on others to do it for us. But if you are a parent and you feel things are not going right in your school, go ask the school, talk about it. You are equipped, you are entitled, empower yourself to do it. If you are a teacher, it doesn't matter whether your school believes in it or not. We have teachers in Prakriti who have gone way beyond what the school expected them to do. And we have some who are not okay to do what the school wants them to do. It's fine, we are all individuals. If you are in a spot where you feel you can help a child, your own or someone else's, doesn't matter, do it. So start with one goal, start small. It's not that tough. Change will come, it will come in its own time. We don't know how much of it will be good, how much of it will not be, but it's in your hands. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much, Shilpa ma'am. We will have to close now, but before that, I really wish if, I mean, I'm asking you now, can I take admission in your school? So yeah, this was a really wonderful discussion, and I feel like a lot that has been spoken about in this panel. If there were people who were actually listening to this, who work in policy, who work in schools, if you think about it, it's actually the roadmap to how we might imagine the future of education. And it's a lot of food for thought. And all of us who have been students, who are students, all of us who are teaching students, right? It also gives us a good sense of the things that we can do to ensure that at least, we are focusing on emotional well-being, on mental health, to achieve our goals of better academic performance, but also just leading better, more meaningful lives, and lives that allow us that not just not lives led for oneself, but lives that also add to the value of the community. So thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you.